Um, my name is Christian Weatherspoon. It's so great to see all of you. I'm Vice President of Digital Storytelling here at the Atlanta History Center, and just wanted to give you all a really brief welcome first to the History Center, but a welcome to the culmination of our Juneteenth programming for this year. We've had a week full of phenomenal events celebrating Juneteenth, and tonight we are so excited to be capping this off with this wonderful discussion with David Dennis about his book, The Movement Made Us. I won't give a lot. I have a very personal relationship with David as a colleague, but more importantly, a friend, classmate, homie. We're from Jackson, as many of you are here. So great to see all of y'all. Great to see all of y'all tonight. See some of y'all again. So thank you for the support. But just to give you all a bit of introduction for our moderator tonight, Dr. David Wall-Rice is a professor of psychology at Morehouse College. He's also principal investigator for the Identity, Art, and Democracy Lab, a research space that explores expressions of identity balance through engagement, the exploration of varied contexts and personal narratives. David graduated from Morehouse with a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology and earned a doctorate in personality psychology from Howard University. With his master's in journalism from Columbia University, David frequently applies his research to cultural criticism. He served on the editorial advisory boards for both the Journal of Negro Education and the Journal of Popular Culture. He's provided commentary for C-SPAN, NPR, PRI, CBS News, CNN, MSNBC, and his writings and opinion have appeared in the Washington Post, LA Times, Al Jazeera America. All right, mood lighting.
That's right, let's do it.
Okay,
Let's
all
do
right,
it.
all right. The Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, Vibe Magazine, and Ebony.com. Thank you, Dr. Rice, for being here.
My pleasure.
And for our author, David Dennis Jr. is a senior writer at The Undefeated. His work has been featured in Atlanta Magazine, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, Huffington Post, among other publications. Dennis is the recipient of the 2021 American Mosaic Journalism Prize. He's a National Association of Black Journalists Salute of Excellence Award winner, and was named one of the Roots 100 Most Influential African Americans of 2020. He lives here in Georgia with his wife and 2 children who are here. Y'all wave. And is a graduate of Davidson College, a proud graduate of Davidson College. And he'll tell you more about that. So yes, just to reiterate, we are so excited and just grateful to have you both here tonight in conversation. And I hope you all enjoy.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for having us here. Thank you all for being here to be in conversation with us, I hope. I have not talked to David. I think the last time we really talked was, well, I won't talk about what we were talking, but we were hanging out. Weren't we trying to figure out if you were going to buy a tuxedo or something like that? If it's going to be powder blue or something like that?
Yeah.
But one of the things that I wanted to kind of start off with is that you have done such a special job with this book, obviously, and we're going to talk about that. But it's not only the writing of the book and the things that you excavated about a country and about a relationship between a father and son and your family, right? But how it is that you've brought so many people into your orbit, And I really feel honored that I'm able to be here and to be in conversation with you. But even greater still to know kind of that arc of relationship that you have with so many different people, right? You really have made folks feel special and connected with this work. So I want to thank you just off top for that. So thank you for that. Hopefully what we're going to do here is have a conversation. I've gone through the book and read the book. I haven't gone through it. I've read the book.
Good. Thank you. That's good to know. Thank you.
I've gone through it. I flipped the pages. Made notes. I have hella questions. Excuse me, children. I have all kinds of questions that I've written at the end. But I really want to have a conversation more than anything. And I've been hesitant to reach out to you and to talk to you or to even talk, the few minutes that we had before we were here today, because I wanted to kind of leave it all out here in front of folks. But can you talk to Talk to us first about what it means to be in this space and in this moment, right? You've written this significant, weighty book about your father and about you, the son of your father, who is a hero, a patriot. We'll get into, how it is that we might also name him a war general, a veteran. But how does it feel to be in this space right now? What does it mean to you? What's the significance of it?
Well, the immediate significance is I think Christian undersold a little bit of our friendship. I'm going to shout out Christian a little bit. And everybody give it up for Christian Weatherspoon who put this together, who is the best, Christian and I went to graduate school together at Northwestern, which is not mentioned in my bio for very obvious reasons. And we were I don't want to say the only black people at Northwestern. We were definitely we were two of the only black people at Northwestern at the Graduate School of Journalism, both from Jackson, both having known all of the same people, but had never met, just strangely enough. Like we'd been at the same place at the same time, knew all the folks, and just had never met. And Christian, it's hard to, and part of that is some of the stuff that's in this book and dealing with ideas of whiteness and being the only black people in this space. I was the only black man in that class. Is trauma, right? And the two of us developed this brother-sister bond throughout that year, and I would not have survived that year without Christian, and we've been friends ever since. And all the people there did not believe in us at all, and for us to be at this moment, Christian's right here, and she's put on this fantastic Juneteenth event and is hosting me and talking about my book, haha, this is this incredible moment. And this whole experience has been a lot of these incredible moments, right? A lot of these moments of I cannot believe that we're here in this space. And it's been like that for my dad. He is, I think one of the most, first of all, one of the most impactful moments, we were in Jackson and we're around friends and family, right? And I'm overwhelmed because it's a book that, written and, families there and people I grew up with. And at the end of it, Arena Evers comes and Medgar Evers' daughter comes and hugs on us, And this book is about closing this loop, closing these circles and closing these, that trauma just leaves things open and trying to close the loop and just have these connections and these relationships. And that's really how we survive. Christian and I survived this traumatic 1 year at Northwestern by having a relationship, by being there for each other, being friends, having somebody to talk to. And my dad and his peers survived that moment by just being together. And that's that's movement work. That's movement work. And so this space is continuing that movement work. So it's been just, fulfilling and special. My dad, I talked to him Sunday, said this makes everything feel worth it, to be in these sort of spaces doing this. So it's just special.
So do you think your ability, and I'm thinking yes, but were you aware of the type of movement work that you've been doing your entire life as informed by your dad? You can kind of calcify it now, right? You can kind of say, well, of course, we have this experience, this necessity to minimize or to avert or to salve for trauma. Did you have that all your life, and did you get that from your pop, or were you aware of it, or is this something that you've realized in the writing?
Yeah, something that I realized in the process of the book. For in particular, family, right? I grew up because of what my dad went through and what my family went through. As a result of that, I grew up thinking that raising a family and movement work were opposed to each other. I thought movement folks couldn't be good parents, and I thought that if I was going to engage in movement work, I couldn't be a good parent and do that at the same time. And one thing that I learned is that, raising your family, loving your kids is movement work. That's part of the work. Like at the end of the day, these movement folks were really concerned with preserving the black family. Like that was at the center of all that they were doing. And these things are not opposed to one another. So I started thinking about, how movement work encapsulates so much more than what we think about it as. Especially like, one of the things that bothered me and that I wanted to address coming into the book is this idea that, there was a lot of like separation and this idea that, okay, you were not in the streets of Ferguson. You weren't getting tear gassed. You didn't go to jail. You weren't part of this movement. And for somebody who does not want to get tear, I don't want to go to jail. I want to do that stuff. It makes you feel like, well, I'm not part of it, right? Yeah. So one of the things we want to do in this book is showcase, if you're a family in the backwoods of Mississippi, and you are hosting these white volunteers in the '64 Freedom Summer, and you're fixing them chicken, and you're housing them, you're part of the movement work. And if that's all you do, that's fine, And so I wanted to get to understand that all of this is part of that work. And so everything that you do, if you do something, you're doing something, And so I think that was one of the central goals of the book.
So have you had the opportunity to bump into folks that you're describing in this way who are not iconic like your father is, who are grateful for that amplification or that highlight?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that has been beautiful about it is that, if you have a black anybody elder in your life, they did something to get black folks free, and whether they were the first black person in their union, their plumbers union, or the first black teacher in their school, or if they donate or they in the book, there's a family who I don't know anything about. We don't know their names. We don't know anything. There's a family, husband and wife, who smuggled my dad in the trunk from Mississippi to Louisiana. We don't know anything else about them. They saved my dad's life, And so one of the beautiful things is hearing from folks who say, yeah, I talked to my grandmother and I found out that my grandmother was the first person to do this, and I talked to my uncle and he did this, And so that's been beautiful. But also, New Orleans Core has been underrepresented in History Talk. So talking to them and seeing that they've been getting some sort of just due has been beautiful. Miss Uvester Simpson came to our event in Jackson, and she nursed Fannie Lou Hamer to health, kept her alive when they were tortured in the jail in Winona. So these are the people who, this is what this book is about. My dad's story is sort of a Trojan horse for you to learn about C.O. Chin and Doris Castle and Maddie Bivens and people who you would never, ever hear in a lot of different places.
So how do you map that even further? I'm just pushing some more. How do you map that on to today? Especially for young folks who might feel like, okay, to exactly to your point, well, I wasn't in the streets in Ferguson, and I'm not trying to get choked out by a white cop on TV and stuff. How is it that they can recognize their worth in their work? I know that I don't want to kind of lean into Instagram or Twitterdom or anything like that, but I know that you oftentimes can see in the more positive spaces that living your righteous black life is a radical feat in and of itself. I'm paraphrasing here, but how does what it is that you're teaching us about history and the relationship you have with your father and your father's experience, what does that tell us about how it is that we can live every day and be heroes?
Yeah, I think one of the big questions coming into the book was, this book was written, Donald Trump was president. It was the beginning of it, right? A lot of it was written during the pandemic, and a lot of it was written post George Floyd. And you look at these things and you say, this is too much. I can't change that. I can't do anything. I can't get Donald Trump out of here, what I'm saying, by myself. And so you just feel like you just need to, it makes you feel paralyzed almost, right? And so what I'm trying to get folks to understand is that if you do something and the next person does something, then maybe you'll do two things, and maybe the next person will do three. And then everybody will sort of sort themselves out, because it took this book is not a sanitized version of movement work. We have, of course, the reverends and the, political figures and the teachers. We also have, gangbangers and sex workers and, club owners and bootleggers who were all contributing to movement work. Mm-hmm. And the idea here is that if I just do one thing, then everybody will sort of figure out where they fit. That's my hope, And so if you are a kid and you're watching you may take to the streets of, because a lot of people were protesting, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you just go out once and you march, and then you go out again and you do something, or you donate. And the hope is that if you just, I feel like there's a barrier of entry mm-hmm. that people feel, and that I have to sacrifice my life, or I have to be willing to give it all to do this, when that's not necessarily how everybody's mindset works. A lot of people ended up losing their lives mm-hmm. or ended up making tremendous sacrifices, but that wasn't people's goals.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Kids don't grow, my son is 9, mm-hmm. My teenager's 16. They don't want to be they're not growing up saying, I want to, fight for women's rights and be oppressed and go to jail. Nobody wants to do that. They want to be astronauts and teachers or whatever. That's something that we have to do as a result of what this country does. Mm-hmm. And so it's the idea that just doing one or two things can kind of get you involved.
All right, I'm going to step back into kind of this respectability place. You're talking about sex workers and gangbangers. How can they be contributing to the movement?
Well, I mean, look, folks needed protection. There were the Deacons for Defense, which was an armed black militia mm-hmm. in the most dangerous parts of this country, who were protecting folks as they were going where they needed to go. Mm-hmm. So, there's a fantastic book by Charlie Cobb, who's a member of SNCC, called "This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed," and it's mm-hmm. all about guns in the movement, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. The sex workers, they were used, what I want to say used, but there was an understanding or acknowledgement that a lot of these white men who proclaimed to hate black people were patronizing black sex workers. Mm-hmm. And so if that sometimes would be hung over their head. If for instance, they, my dad used to stay in a place in Hattiesburg, and the woman who owned the hotel was also known for a place where sex workers came in and out. Mm-hmm. So one night, 3 police officers, or 3 white guys came to the hotel looking for my dad. They said, "We're gonna come get Dave Dennis out of here." Obviously he wasn't gonna make it through the night. And so the lady who owned the place, Miss Lennon Woods, said, "Okay, you can take him, but I'm gonna let everybody know what y'all actually come in here for." Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So all these people were contributing. Mm-hmm. My grandmother was part of the Black Beauticians mm-hmm. in Shreveport, which was one of the most influential movement organizing spaces in Shreveport. These black women mm-hmm. who, you think about the beauty shop, that's where the information gets disseminated. That's where people organize. And they were as much as important as the reverends in Shreveport, it was these women who were doing this stuff. So all of these folks were part of this movement.
So this idea of I love Lonnie Guinier would discuss this idea of leveraging your democratic space, mm-hmm. right? Everybody gets to have a voice in a democratic space. So this idea of being exclusive mm-hmm. does not exclude you from your humanness, right? From fundamental humanity. I think that's so important. And I really, David, the thing, I was talking to Mick, my wife's name is Mickey, who I think introduced us. I think we know, right? So I was talking to her here, and I was like, Mick, it's just it's a sweet, beautiful book. Mm-hmm. And it moved me, as a son, right? In thinking about, unresolved things that I have with my father and all this kind of stuff. And I really, I mean, of course, you had me when you're like, okay, so I'm seeing James Baldwin on this VHS. I mean, you got me. You got me with Baldwin, right? But then also saying, within the first 3 pages, this is a man who was not the father that I deserved or who he needed to be. How are you? I don't. How are you able to do that self-work and that therapy and get your dad to ride along with this? You know what I mean? He already went through living hell. So to come back and to revisit it with his son, it shows a special type of courage he has as well. But how do you get to that space to where you're like, we're going to do this?
Crown Royal was very we should have got a Crown Royal sponsorship for as much as we had to get through the emotions of this book. That's important. Also, neither one of us knew that was what we were doing. Mm-hmm. You know, we were sort of I thought going into this book that I knew exactly where I wanted to go.
And this is at the pitch. So this is after you pitched the book and it was accepted, right? You knew you were going in a certain direction, but that's not where you went.
Well, first, I'll take it back. In the pitch, I did not want my voice.
Proposal, I mean.
I didn't want my voice in the book.
Okay.
Because I did not feel, and again, we're talking about not feeling worthy of movement space, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't feel like anybody wanted to hear what I had to say. You know, my dad's been through all this stuff. Like I felt like I'd be in there like, man, my dad didn't pay enough attention to me. You know, like, who cares about that, right?
Right.
And so it was really like at first, you know, I'd put my voice in the footnotes. I want to do like long footnotes, you know. And my agent was like, no, let's put you on the page, you know. And my editor was saying the same thing, and I could. It actually, you know, was easier to write my dad's story, which I thought it would be easier to do these personal essays. I write essays all the time. I thought it'd be super easy, but I wrote a whole book of really, really bad essays that I just couldn't figure it out. Couldn't figure out where I could go with it. And my editor kept telling me it's a journey. Like books need to have a journey. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't have a journey. I know my dad. I know where we are. And it wasn't until that I sort of realized that I had an understanding of my childhood that my dad was, you know, did civil rights movement work, left, and was just sort of embedded in, you know, like talking and speaking about movement stuff. And I didn't learn till later, till we were doing the book, that when we moved back to Mississippi, my dad was 50 years old. I was like 6, and that was his first time coming back to Mississippi and talking about these things and digging up these memories for the first time. So my childhood was formed by a man who was revisiting his ghosts for the very first time. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of this blockbuster thing that happened where I was like, it reshaped my understanding of my childhood. Mm-hmm. And that was when we started to do the work, you know? And so about a year ago, we took a week-long trip to Myrtle Beach, and I wrote these letters. I'd written these letters, and I gave them to my dad. And funny aside, like, so we were at like a little resort thing, so there's like a waterfall thing outside and all this stuff, but I didn't know it was there, right? So I'd given my letters to my dad, and I'm hearing this waterfall, and it's the morning, and it's like 2 hours, and I'm thinking it's the shower. I was like, oh my God, I killed my dad. Like I gave him these letters. He'd been in the shower for like 2 hours.
That's not a funny.
I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, I've like caused too much pain to my dad. This is terrible. And so I went. He was like, no, I've just been sitting out here and I read your letters. And I was like, oh, okay. And so we just sat. So he came out and he said, I read your letters. You know, I don't want you to change anything. I respect what you said. And we talked. We cried. And we did the work, you know, we did that work and did this stuff that was, you know, tough. Like my dad and I, before the book had come to we were at a good place, like a place that lots of black men and dads and sons are at. We're like, you know, you did what you did. You're getting old. I'm gonna love you, and we're gonna be fine. And then, you know, you're gonna pass, and I will love you through this. Fine. There's like a lot of people are just like, and that's fine for a lot of folks. That was fine for us. But now we're in this space, like a whole new level that we did not know existed, because we had the conversations that dads and sons often don't have, and we were never going to have probably if we hadn't started this book.
So is that instruction, do you think, for folks, or at least templative for folks who might need to push a little further? And I'm speaking really about, I mean, we can speak on all different kinds of relationships, but personally, I'm talking about black men, right, and their fathers. Would you encourage, you know, this revelation is worth the work and the pain that you might have to go through? This is my psychology stuff. I can't help it. I'm sorry. Right?
I don't know. Like it's hard. You know what I'm saying? It's hard. And I think the framework of knowing that this was part of a book helped.
Okay.
You know, like knowing that this was something that we need to get through to put on a page helped guide us to that moment.
Yeah.
You know, because I knew the questions I needed to ask, partially because I knew what I needed to fit onto this page. And otherwise, I would recommend you have a psychologist or somebody to walk you through it. Like this ain't like freehand type of like stuff. You know,
Right.
like we needed sort of the framework of this is something that I'm going to ask this. I'm going to get to here. I need to know this. You know, I needed to know it. And there were questions I had because there were blanks on the page. So I would, yes, definitely encourage people to do some sort of healing work with their parents. But I don't know, like I said, I don't know if we could have done or if this would have been good or done well if not for the fact that we need to do this for a book.
Can you tell me, I'm trying to keep in my mind where I want to jump to. I want to go to letter 4.
Okay.
How does the interaction and the excavation, the work, I keep on talking about the work and the heavy lifting, how does that make you a well, no, I'm going to ask this first. I'm sorry. I'm going to get to this question. It's a good one. But how were you able to, did you have a resentment for the movement, quote unquote, the movement, right? Because you have this person who is your father, who is doing all this yeoman's work, right? But you feel alone and isolated and neglected in many respects. So how are you able to still, well, I'm assuming that there is some resentment that's there, but how were you still able to be in this vein of the importance and significance of movement nevertheless?
I don't know if I had resentment for movement work. I had resentment for what white supremacy forced these folks to do, you know, and what I felt like it forced people to do. Like my dad joined the Freedom Rise when he was 20 years old, and he made that decision at 20 that I am willing to die for this movement. And so the feeling that I had is that if you are willing to sacrifice your life, then you are then willing to sacrifice everything, including your family and your children. And it's hard to get out of this space of constant years of saying, I don't know if I'm going to wake up tomorrow, whatever. You know what I'm saying? Whatever, right? And then you survive that, and you have children, and you have spouses, and you have family, and you have to plan. But you've lived the formative years of your life thinking I'm not going to plan for next week, right? So my resentment was for, you know, what these folks, what I felt like they did to my dad. You know, like this book initially was a very dark book. You know, it was a book like, you know, my dad at James Chaney's funeral says, I'm tired of funerals. That was going to be the name of the book. And it was just going to be like, look at what these white folks did to us. You know, but there's no value to that. So it turned into look at what black folks in especially Mississippi and Louisiana were able to do to defeat a country that you know extended war tactics to them at 20 years old or whatever. And you know, coming to a better understanding of what that meant, but still the resentment at the beginning was, yes, you turned my dad into somebody who was incapable of having a family. You know, that's where sort of that resentment, you know, rested.
But I really appreciate you saying that and naming that, of course, within the text, but here, because I think I'm coming in with some assumptions, knowing you having conversations and things like that, and I'm assuming that the audience has some assumptions as well. But this idea of white supremacy is the context within which we're operating, right? And so it's not just, you know, it's not just this thing that's movement work. It really is pushing back at this evil oppression that's pressing us down and looking at all the nasty ways that it happens. I'm curious then, and this is going a little bit in the direction of what you were talking about in terms of, you know, knowing that your life could come to an end, right? And I'm thinking about the chapter Fear in God, right? So there's this idea of your dad says he doesn't even remember. I think I'm remembering correctly. He doesn't even remember who said it, but there's no room in here for fear and God. And it was like he was able to let some of these things go, right? I wonder if this kind of fear and this attachment to family in many respects was one of the things he had to let go. Right. And how is it that you still are able to have faith when, you know, I don't know. Can you get to my answer?
Yeah. No,
answer the unasked question.
I think that's exactly what it is. Is that like my feeling was that if you've let all that go, you can't get it back.
Yeah.
You know, like that was one of my fears with when Ferguson stuff happened, was like, if I dig into this thing, you know, but I got a family at home. If I really dig into this thing in the way that is in the tradition of what my dad did, I don't know if I'm coming back. You know, and so there was a lot of fear in that, you know, in that, because the greatest fear, for my dad had let go of that fear of dying, but for me, my biggest fear has been failing my family, you know, and so I did not want to let that happen, right, and so so I think that's part of it is what do you let go of? There were people like Medgar Evers did not have. He hadn't let go. He wanted to raise his kids. Yeah. You know, and I think that's what's important is that what white supremacy was doing, and the evil that was going on was they were taking these people from their families. You know, there are generations of kids who have lost parents, or even if their parents are alive, their parents have locked themselves emotionally in this place where they cannot come out from. You know, and that is central to the damage. That is intentional damage. You know, like we talk about the ways of destroying the black family and things like that, and mass incarceration, things like that. But there's a destruction that is, even if you are present in the home, that they have destroyed a family and our relationships, or have tried to.
David, you say that and I got chills because one of the things that you said your fear was failing your family. I think we all can kind of understand that, you in a very, very, you know, kind of escalated way considering who your dad is. But I'm curious if you've come to the realization, or you must have, that not only did you not fail your family, but you saved your father. Mm-hmm. Like you allowed white supremacy not to take your dad. Mm-hmm. Because I'm thinking about towards the end of the book where your father is like, I don't want to give it away, but you guys got to read it anyway.
He survives at the end. So
right. But we're at the end where, you know, he's talking about this isolation is driving him nuts, right? And you're able to be there for him with the family. And, you know, he says towards the end, like, this is worth it, which is what you shared before, but I don't know that I would change it because I couldn't be here the way that I am right now. Mm-hmm. So do you have a certain I don't know, man. That's some heavy shit.
I think one of the things is about, and you know, my therapist helped me through understanding this tremendously, is that you can heal backwards by healing forward. You know, is that, you know, my dad takes tremendous pride in the type of father that I am. You know, and our ability to sort of break these curses, you know, we call them generational curses, but, you know, they don't feel, you know, once you get down, they don't feel as supernatural as we've talked about. Like these are like things that have happened to them, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, if you can heal your relationship with your children, then that, you know, like this book, yes, a lot of this PTSD and the things like that happened from 61 to 64. Mm-hmm. But as we learn early in the book, and as I learned through the research, is that, you know, they tried to destroy my grandfather on the plantation. Mm-hmm. You know, they tried to destroy, my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother, and people like that. And that their perceived failures in their families is something that you can heal through how you push your family forward. You know, and to have, you know, these tremendous children that I have here is feeling as though we are healing these relationships backwards. And so for my dad to be part of that, like you can, do work to heal. Like you may never, your parents may have already passed. You may not, you and your parents' relationship may be unsalvageable in a personal way, in a lot of different ways. But the work that you can do for future generations can retroactively heal those relationships, because you're informed by what happened, but you're pushing against it backwards by healing forward.
Are you proud of the father you are?
Yeah, I think so. They're here. They're here. They're kind of like, my son was giving me thumbs up at the thing, and October gave me some affirmative grunts, which is like a 16-year-old giving you affirmative grunts is like really cool. So that's good. No, I mean, I think like they're just remarkable. Like I would not, I was with the friend, like sometimes you say something out loud and you don't realize until you say something out loud. So I had a friend, and she was talking about she wants to get married and have children, asked me questions about it. And I was like, I would not, if I tried to have a family 1,000,000 times, I would not have one like the one I have. And so that just makes you, so yeah, I am proud of it. And I think, my wife has, made that happen, and I'm just lucky. It's just a lucky part of it. And I think that we've.
But it's not only luck; it's work.
It's work. It is work. Yes, it is work. But I feel lucky, But it has been work, because we come from, families that have been impacted by this stuff. Mississippi and Texas and all this stuff. These type of families been. If you Black in America, you have been impacted by white supremacy somewhere deep down in those guts of your family legacy, and to work against that is, it really feels like a miracle a lot of times.
And speaking of kind of miracle faith and letter 4, this idea that resonated with me in a special way, because you're talking about a tornado, right? And I remember a tornado coming through downtown Atlanta, and and this is when my son Biko was like, he was just born, and I remember like, having newly born, and I remember feeling him flinch when the debris had hit the window. And it was the first time for me, I was like, oh, brother, you ain't got to worry about nothing. I don't have no idea how I'm stopping a tornado. But yeah, I mean, I will, I'll be gone before you will. And in reading your words, you were talking about how it is you could not stop a tornado. You could not stop this white supremacy that's supposed to have been gone. How do you still reconcile and wrestle with and come to terms with your fear and or anxiety around protecting this beautiful family? I mean, we got young people that we want to make sure are able to be young and to live, to be alive and to live, right? How do you do that?
They're not going to win. You know what I'm saying? Like the one thing this book instilled in me is a tremendous amount of faith, because the country, the biggest superpower in the world, with nukes and all of this stuff, like bear down on Black folks in Mississippi, sharecroppers and teachers and kids, and the sharecroppers and teachers and kids won. Like Fannie Lou Hamer was at the Democratic National Convention dictating United States policy. You know what I'm saying? Like they did not they have such an upper hand in a lot of different ways, but white supremacy, right? The worst thing that white folks can do to us will not win. And I just have eternal faith in that. And I just have this eternal faith that my kids, and if they have kids or whatever we have generationally down the line, are going to win. Because like we are built from something that is stronger than the hatred that they will have for us. Like I don't have these concrete, sort of like logistical reasons of how we're going to win, but I just feel like we come from this cloth of victory where it should not have happened, and I just feel like we'll just continue doing that.
I'm looking at my watch, and I swear I think it's wrong, because God, dog. Oh man, we can't have till 10 o'clock. I have. So let me ask this question, then I want to open it up, right? Well, I'm going to ask two questions and open up. The first is, talk to me about, you talking about this idea of white supremacy in war, right? You wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times, I think it was June 11th, a couple weeks ago, where you said, my dad and folks who fought in this very real war should be acknowledged and recognized as veterans. And the language you use in there is that this isn't rhetoric or this isn't hyperbole in terms of the war that they went through. They really, they were bombed, right? They were fighting and in institutionalizing a democracy that was not realized until they did the work. Can you talk about that a little bit and talk about how is that for real? And you gave some examples in the piece about how, no, this is not beyond the pale. It can be done. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the things, so going into this book, I'd always wanted to write this as a war book, which is goes back to my English teacher in high school. We read The Things They Carried, which is a war book, and it was short stories. And I was like, I want to write Dad's book in this short story form. But the more I thought about these stories, the more I thought that these are war stories. Like these people were like you said, they were bombed, they were assassinated, they had spies in their meetings. There was disinformation that they were, like the Goodman Cheney Schwerner situation, which they were murdered on this date in 1964. So they were murdered this date in 1964, which is, I was telling Chrissy this morning, I just I felt, because my dad was supposed to be in the car with them. And so he had bronchitis, and Mickey Schwerner told my dad, just stay back. So today is just like was a weird day. So anyway, what they did to Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner was they burned down the church in Neshoba County to snuff them out, to bring them down to Mississippi, right? Once they got here, they, used police, the, United States military essentially, killed them, hid the bodies, used from top down, right? Edgar Hoover and all these people were using misinformation to say they fled to Cuba and they were communists, whatever, and hid their bodies. 44. Like this was a military tactic that they used to kill 3 men, right, in their home base, right? And the idea behind this is that at the end of this, despite all this militarized tactics that the United States was using, these people installed democracy in the United States for the first time, right? Which is what I had been told we fight wars for. We go to other countries to install democracy. Well, they installed democracy in the United States for however long. I'm going to argue that it lasted. It was here, right? So the argument here is that they are war veterans. Not only should we acknowledge them as war veterans, they should be getting all the same VA benefits that all other war veterans in this country get. They should be getting the free health care. They have PTSD. I know people who are still suffering from physical beatings that they received in the 60s, right? And so this is a way to sort of help. I know VA benefits have a long way to go with the way they even treat veterans, but this is a start, right? It also, again, it applies a language of understanding that United States of America waged war against black folks, right? And I think that's also vastly important to understand that how this country was so resistant to black folks having equal rights, to democracy itself, which this country is supposedly founded on. They were so resistant on it that they went out and waged war in these places to destroy black folks. And I think we need to apply the language and also the benefits that come with it.
Last question before we open it up, if that's all right. David, the interesting thing about you is that you've written and documented this life, or these lives, right? You're also a culture critic, right? So you're on Around the Horn talking about sports, right? You're writing about hip hop culture in many respects. You're talking about popular culture writ large. Can you connect the dots there and talk about how being a voice, a reasoned voice in those spaces is also movement work? Because I'm thinking about your buddy Justin Tinsley and, his book, It Was All a Dream, and the stuff he talked about with Nipsey Hussle and things like that. Can you talk about how all these things are connected in some way? Because I think they are, and I think it's important for us to kind of realize how, again, the iconography that we oftentimes attribute and say this is how it is that we get free is not the singular way. Mm-hmm. It also is in the everyday, and your commentary on it kind of helps us.
Mm-hmm. I have one answer, and I have an answer that's like when the camera's not on.
Got it.
So, is this streaming? Are we streaming? Oh, okay. So this is so I could permission to speak freely. So, I think again, like the understanding of what that movement work is all encompassing. And early, I was just a hip hop. I was a hip hop writer, right? And understanding hip hop as movement work, and and the way that it chronicles what's going on in Black life, the way that it is theoretically redistributing wealth theoretically, and attacking that in the movement workspace, which early on I got a lot of pushback from some folks who were saying, well, your dad's movement, like, why are you doing hip hop stuff? That's not, and I was like, well, this is part of the work. Mm-hmm. And, around the horn and TV stuff, which, don't nobody take this part out, but like, I go on there and I will talk, hockey and plus minus and all that stuff. But when somebody goes into a school and shoots it up in Texas, and they ask me to talk about it, I will say the words white supremacy on national television. Yeah. And I don't, and not knowing if they're going to invite me back after I do that. Yeah. And say that, if you have a coach who compares the George Floyd protest to the January 6th riots, and they are coming out of an anti-black white supremacist playbook. Mm-hmm. I will say, like, to me, it is important to like go down, I do love sports, but that's not my main goal of doing this thing. Mm-hmm. Is that I will talk, I will do all that stuff. But when what hits the fan and they need that other type of stuff, I will also be standing there to make sure I say that. Mm-hmm. So that is sort of the ultimate value of doing that type of stuff too.
Last question, somewhat related. What's our responsibility in having read this book? What's my responsibility, the folks who are Black in this room, and then what are white folks' responsibility in terms of reading this book? How do they respond afterward? What are they supposed to do? We supposed to do.
I'm gonna start with the we first. I don't know. I just think to understand that there is space for you somewhere in this work. That's all I want. I want you to have a feeling that that you can do something. That's all I want. And I don't even want you to read the book and to say like, I'm going to go do this, but just to feel comfort in doing it, or to feel not so, I don't want to say scared, but not so resistant to the idea that you can contribute. I want you to feel empowered. So I want you to feel that, not necessarily, forced to. Like I don't want you to read the book and feel pressured to do something. I want you to feel that's something that you need, that you want to do. So.
And then what are white folks supposed to do? They feel the same way? They have space?
I don't know. I just think I hadn't totally thought about like I just think obviously, well, I feel as though white folks should feel like when I leave Mississippi, right? And I don't know, are white folks, y'all from the South? Are y'all from the South? Georgia? Okay, so from the South, North Carolina, right? When I leave Mississippi, people tell me, how could you live in Mississippi? It's so racist. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if white folks, when y'all leave the South, does anybody ask y'all that? And no, it's one person. And so why is the racism of the South something I have to hold instead of white folks holding that? Like, I'm not creating this racism, right? Why aren't white folks feeling the shame of racism? Like, why aren't white folks as angry or as compelled to destroy white supremacy as I am, right? Because, like, I'm angry about it, obviously, but why aren't white folks? Or why are white folks, pressing each other about the racism? Why is it something that we have to hold? So one thing I want is for black folks to, unburden themselves with this feeling of shame or sadness about the racism of the South and feel instead the pride of what we've done. And I think, I don't care who holds it. White folks can hold it if they want, but we need to release that from ourselves. But I think that it's important, not just from the book, but just in general for white folks to feel as, I won't say as oppressed, but as, angry or as burdened by white supremacy as we are.
I love that. Thank you, David. Appreciate it. So how do we want to do Q&A? Just if there are questions? Yeah? Okay, fabulous. If there are questions, please.
Thank you guys so much. This was so great. And I've got a comment and a question. My first comment is, so recently I'm doing some things with the King Center, and I found out I got my dad's larger story of being a child during the Children's March in Jackson, Mississippi. So he was about 10, and it was so traumatic. And they were called rats. I looked up newspapers, and in the classes I teach, I got to share his story. So the fact that you mentioned how having that conversation with your dad, and it opened up, like the trauma, the wound, but it was also healing. It was like a balm. I saw the same thing with my dad. My mom was like, he's never told me that, and we've been married for 50 years. I was like, see? So I just wanted to make that comment that I appreciate that because I had that happen. But my question goes to, I had to write it down. C.T. Vivian, I was a part of his church, but before he passed, he said that this country would no longer be democratic in order to preserve white nationalism or white supremacy, whatever you want to call it. So what does your dad think about where we are today? And where do we go from here? I know I haven't read the book yet. I got it though. So you may have put it in there, but I'd love to know what's like his prophecy for where we go from here.
I think Dad I think is hopeful. I mean, he has a lot of hope, and was moved by the George Floyd protests and moved by the work of young folks. I think his charge is actually to the elders to do that sort of conversation, that sort of talking. I think a lot of times people feel as though the two generations have different movements, which there were, and this book is a lot about young folks, but there were elders as part of that movement work too. And so there's a need for that conversation to be had, not necessarily in this way of, I didn't want this book to be like a how to do movement work from old guy tells kids march this way, but it wanted to be, conversational. And I think he's really pushing for us to open that conversation across both sides, elders and young folks. But I think he feels hopeful, which how could you not feel hopeful given what they were able to accomplish?
So appreciate it, David. Thanks for the exchange. So just kind of following up on that question, were there any points in writing the book where you or your father experienced so much trauma from the retelling of the story that you almost gave up? And if so, how did you get through it, besides the crown?
Mostly crown, but no, it's I think the hardest part. Well, the hardest part for Dad was actually around when George Floyd was killed, was murdered, was that it gave the George Floyd video, which I write about in the book, gave my dad a video understanding of what his dead friends went through. Like he knows that Medgar Evers was shot. He knows that Goodman Chaney Schwerner had been killed. He knows that Herbert Lee was killed, things like that. But to actually watch somebody in their last seconds gave him a really painful context to it. And at that moment, he disappeared on me for a little bit. He just was like, I couldn't do it. And also the eulogy for James Chaney, he hadn't watched the video or read the eulogy again. So going through that was extremely painful for him. For me, it was writing about what they did to Fannie Lou Hamer and Winona was the hardest part for me. Like to go through all the documents of what they did to her and write about it and write it out. And not just her, but these teenagers, they tortured them, in a jail. And writing about that was extremely difficult for me. And there were parts where I just was like, this is hard. And even since then, I have like today, obviously we've had a lot of different, June 21st of the anniversary of Goodman Chaney Schwerner being killed has happened throughout my life. But now, after having spent essentially 2 years as my dad, writing in the first person, feeling like I know these people, these sort of moments hit me a lot harder than they used to.
I don't think I'll really need this either. First of all, thank you for being here, and thank you for writing this. I'm as mad as anybody you'll see that looks like me about oppression, particularly black oppression, for the various reasons of the fascism that we see today. It was occurring then, they just didn't call it that. That's what I see we're in right now, this period. I too am hopeful. Jose Williams was a friend of mine. And also thank you for those thousands of people that were in beauty shops, pool rooms, because he used to tell me the first place I went, like in Albany or any city I went to the pool room and I organized the guys so we'd have a network with the beauty shop so everybody would turn out for the protest and everybody would be ready for what was going to happen. And boy, he faced death a bunch of times, not just on that bridge. Secondly, I have a different perspective. My dad was a prisoner of war in Nazi Germany, so I'm 76. And when we moved to Georgia in December of '62, I can remember the Klan met up the street in Lafayette. I used to call it Lafayette till I was corrected in my high school class by an ignorant English teacher. So I have a glimmer of what's going on, and I've been out there for a long time registering voters. I used to go with people when I was 14. That's a while back. So what I see, the value of what you've done is to bring forward all these things that are so relevant now, and that you keep up with popular culture. You do see all those links, like Public Enemy. That was a big statement that they made in the Spike Lee movie. Tremendous. And I went to school at Clark College, not the University of Georgia, back before CAU. So I'm only saying that anybody that has self-respect understands what's going on in this country, and I'm working to change it. I just wish I was healthier, because there will be a reckoning for all this carnage and these things that are happening, and you have to have a tremendous amount of faith. So I appreciate what you've done. And then my only question is this: how do you see that we can change so that everybody sees how valuable it is to vote?
I think that there's a lot of understanding of how valuable it is to vote. Otherwise, there would be so much working against people actually voting. I think that one of the things that people should understand is that voting is one piece of it, and that you vote. I don't think anybody in any sort of movement work thought of voting as an end all be all, right? It was an entree into, representation to this other stuff. And so I think that if black folks didn't value voting, then white folks wouldn't be fighting so hard for us not to have it, And so I think that the value is there, but I think there needs to also be an understanding that, that's just part of it, because I think sometimes political fandom is like one of the craziest things. Yes, the Obamas, like, what are you doing? Like, they're part of they are part of the American empire. Like, I love them. Like, I love like they play cousins or whatever. But still, you got to hold them to the fire. Understand that they are part of something that is destructive to us, and you got to push them beyond where they already are. So voting is part of it, but we got to sort of be instructional about what's next.
Something you said at the end just made me stop and think. I just wanted to get your continued thoughts of what that actually looks like. You talked about us letting go of the burden of racism and white folks embracing it more. What does it look like for black people to let go of that burden, and kind of, not to the point of becoming complacent, but just from the standpoint of letting go of the burden and kind of pushing it back on where it needs to be? What does that look like to you?
I just think like the way, that black, like sometimes there is a shame that comes with racism that black folks hold, or like there is I don't want to see any more stories about slavery, or I don't want to hear about, like, why should I be ashamed of that? You know what I'm saying? Like, obviously there are some people who tell stories in a way that's detrimental of us, but I just think that part of the reason that shame is so debilitating is because it makes you feel as though, you come from something that's wrong. You know what I'm saying? And I think that one of the ways to do that is these conversations, right? These conversations that you have, that understanding that your parents or your grandparents or some were what they were fighting against and what they accomplished, right? So that's part of undoing that burden. Like I when I came out of Mississippi and folks were saying, how could you be from how could you come from Mississippi? I'm thinking, well, I came from with Medgar Evers and Fannie Lou Hamer and Annie Devine, and like these folks were the blueprint for movement work in this country, and clearly white folks are trying to replicate what white folks in Mississippi have been doing, right? And unburdening ourselves, part of unburdening ourselves is black folks and movement workers and resistance fighters replicating what black folks in Mississippi have been doing from the beginning. So that's one of the functions of, like, this abortion stuff. It's a Mississippi case, right? There's a abortion clinic, right? So you have to understand, like, instead of saying, wow, like, look at what they've done, they've only think about what the people who are doing to keep that abortion clinic open have been through, and what they are doing to make it, happen. Let's replicate that sort of stuff instead of feeling ashamed of it, saying let's think about the movement tradition that we come from and embrace that.
Because the shame is a part of the success of white supremacy.
Right.
To be made to feel that way, right?
Right.
When you're watching Roots or whatever, I'm thinking about when I was a kid and I'm watching Roots and I'm like, oh man, I don't want to be Kunta Kinte, right? But you think about how it is that it's presented and then what it's like in real life. Like these folks that David's talking about are superheroes. Well, the people who were enslaved are superheroes, right? We're the products of them. So if we reframe that and place agency in the appropriate ways, there's where accountability kind of sets.
I have a question. Hey, David. So we are from the same place. We're from Jackson, right? And you talked about Mississippi being very racist, but Jackson is also very black. So like growing up, I kind of had this bubble of going to all black schools, went to Jackson Stadium, and came here, went to Clark, Atlanta. So for me, I kind of was protected from it, even though both of my parents were from the Mississippi Delta. So like my grandmother started the Head Start program with Fannie Lou Hamer, and my grandfather, hosted stuff in his church. So I heard the stories, but I feel like it wasn't until I was an adult, went back to Mississippi working in corporate America, where it started feeling real, like it's a little bit different. And more than that, I think the murders of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown are what made it really, really, really real for me. So I want to know that even though you heard all these stories from your dad, you knew about the movement, what moment made it real for you? Like, when did the movement and your responsibility become like okay, I know I've heard the past, I'm inundated with it, but now it's real for me and I got to do something.
You know, it's interesting. So we are Jackson Public Schools products, Jackson Public Schools. Well, Jackson Public School is an interesting place, right? So I went to Murrah High School, which was at the time, which was the white high school,
Right.
which was like 3% white.
And I'm Callaway, so it's
Right.
like 1% white.
Right. So like, but what was interesting to me was that it gave me a really interesting understanding about how racial dynamics work, because it would be a lot of, because we had like the AP classes. So there was like a lot of white parents who wanted to like be allies and didn't believe in private schools. They sent their kids to Murrah, whatever. So it was fascinating to me because it would be like 30 kids in the classroom, like 2 white kids surrounded by black folks. And now you're in a situation where white kids have to sort of figure out how to navigate these black spaces, right? Even though ultimately they have an immense amount of power, but in this one vacuum from 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., they got to figure out how to survive around black folks, right? And like they sort of grew up to be like some of the like, you know, these white kids who just like understand black folks and talk to black, you know, and things like that, because it was flipped, right? Like no matter how much power your parents have, you slip up and say something crazy, you getting put in a locker, right? And so it was fascinating, right? And so it taught me a lot about that this is all a construct of who has power at one specific moment, right? I'll tell you another thing that was interesting to me is I studied abroad in Ghana, right? And there wasn't a lot of black kids, like 3 black kids that studied abroad program, but we were learning this language, Twi, which is what they speak in Ghana, traditional language, and it's a rhythmic language, right? So we're in this class, we got these all Ghanaian teachers, and they're teaching us this rhythmic stuff, and these white kids are fish out of water, right? And these black kids, we getting it, we loving it, we connecting with the teachers, and it helped me understand, again, that there's nothing wrong with me and my peers and my friends. It's just about who's running the show, right? And so those are some of the things that sort of helped me understand. But in terms of the racism making it sort of real, I think it sort of always was. Like I think, you know, my dad, when we moved to Jackson, he showed me Eyes on the Prize, which was probably a terrible idea. It was like 6 years old. He was like, "We're moving to Jackson. This is Jackson, Mississippi." So like that was probably a bad idea at the time. But I remember that night sort of crying and thinking that I just remember the Klan. And I thought the Klan was coming to my house that night. Because obviously you're 6, you don't have an understanding of time really and all that stuff. So that sort of was real to me at that moment. Was like, you know, this is what this place is. But I felt like there was, you know, and the book does a lot of this sort of inverting time on itself. So it didn't feel like the past. It sort of felt like this is where we are now. So I sort of always kind of had that feeling, I think.
Okay.
Oh, but I will tell you this one time when I was I went to the Mississippi Governor's School at Mississippi University for Women, North Mississippi, and I was 15, and they took us to this gravesite to do community service to clean up this gravesite, and I sort of was not paying attention to the history lesson because it was the history lesson, whatever. So what I learned, like afterwards, I was like gonna go pick up the stuff. My friends were like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm about to," and they were like, "Did you hear what they said?" I was like, "No." They said, "Well, so what happens is it was a Confederate gravesite, but they had Union soldiers buried there, right?" And so he was like, the joke is the Confederate tombstones are pointed and the Union around so you can sit on the Union tombstones, right? And like, I was like, I'm not clean up after these dead racists. Like, what are you doing? So like, that was sort of like for me. And so I just threw my bag down. I was like, I'm leaving. I'm not doing, like, to me, that was like my first, maybe one of my, I don't know, maybe there were some other times where I was like, I don't know, I can't. Oh, that's my dad telling embarrassing stories. But no, there was, I think, yeah. So that was sort of one of the times I was like, it felt, you know, urgent at the time.
Hi. I just wanted to get your take on Blacksit, because I'm from Ghana and I have people in Ghana who are wondering why I want to stay here in America. So do you feel like being here is what will help with the movement, or do you think that people leaving is actually something that would help?
I think it's a personal thing, it's a personal choice. I think, there have been times, and like I'm looking at 2024, and I'm like, we may have to, may have to make some moves. But I think it's a personal choice. I mean, there are there are a lot of different schools of thought. There are some folks who are just like, we built this place. This is our place. You can't move us from this place. But then there's also like, I gotta take care of mine. So it's hard. I don't think I have an answer for that. I think it's like, a sort of a personal sort of thing. And my hope is that, a lot of these folks considering these moves are consulting or thinking about the brothers and sisters in, Ghana and all these places before you think you can just go up in there and start moving around, which is one of the important things of the book, is that, folks moved into these areas and learned about the areas and try to take it over, which, I hope that that's one of the things that we carry over when we do this going forward. Toby, hey Toby, that's my kid, October. Hey Toby.
Hi. Oh. Okay. Hi. All right. So I definitely did read this book. I was probably like one of the first people. And I sure did cry. Yeah. But I do have a question, and this is kind of going off the rails, but also at the same time, like kind of connected. As you know, like my whole thing is like gender and queer studies and da 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 da. So how would you connect to like, you were talking about like movement work and stuff like that. How would you connect this all to like queer movements now, especially since like June, Pride Month? Yay!
That's a good question. I would like to mention last September when I had my first thing. I was doing a reading with somebody else, and October got the mic, and I was like, October's gonna ask a question. October was like, the other person reading, I have a question for you. So I'm glad you got I'm glad it was. No, I think thanks a lot. Right. I think at all of this work, black folks, particularly black women, black queer folks, have been at the center of it, and I think intersectional work is, you can't have movement work until you have intersectional work. And I think, Mrs. Hamer, we're not free till everybody's free is like the creed of how intersectional work works, and I think that it's all extremely connected, because like you cannot, I'm of the belief that you cannot be part of movement work if you are not in part of movement work for everybody, so like there are people who a lot of folks tend to feel like they need to follow who are homophobic or anti-LGBT, who I don't feel like they're worth following. Like there's no space for that in movement work, and I think that it's important to keep that in mind. And I think that queer folks are at the center of this. But it's also got to be a two-way situation. We can't have women and queer folks at the heart of this movement and then not be at the movement for them. So I think there needs to be more of that and more of that sort of discussion, instead of it being a lot of what is essentially a lot of black male focused discussion and discourse about it. And Christian Weatherspoon, make some noise for Christian.